Hello, everyone. This is Brother Malachi, and I have Brother Abu here. And we're just going to do a quick follow-up on the Daniel 10:13 text. And we're going to discuss a little bit about the differences between the Strong's Concordance and the Masoretic text. So jumping right in real quick, actually, I want to show a image that Brother Gis sent me, and then I want to play an audio clip of a message that Brother Gis left yesterday. And then I want to see what you think, Brother Abu, regarding the message and the image that he sent me.
All right, sounds good.
This goes back to a scholarly debate that has been had, or a point of view of how the scholars look at the word, how it's supposed, how the particular word that we're talking about here, one, in the Hebrew, how it's to be translated by letters into the English. So when we talk about the translation of the word one in the English, okay, this is what I'm dealing with. You have, and here's, well, let me explain. There's a difference in the letter structure of a Hebrew word and an English word. You're going by the sound in the Hebrew of how that word sounds. You have to match that sound with the vowel or consonant of the word that you're trying to create in English. That's the whole point. So what happens is, this is the reason why, when you, to give you an example, when you look in the Strong's Concordance, Genesis 2:21, when God removed one of the ribs of Adam, the word in the Strong's Concordance is not aḥad or aḥad, it's eḥad or eḥad, meaning with the E and not the A. But when you look at it in the Bible Hub, they're using the A. In the Strong's Concordance, they're using the E. Notice that the Bible Hub translators refer to the Strong's Concordance, showing that the Strong's Concordance is not irrelevant, and not that there's this giant errors that's made in the Strong's Concordance, because most of the Bible Hub refers to the Strong's Concordance.
Okay, Brother Abu, so we just heard the message from Brother Gist. And I just want to say that, first off, we're not going off of someone's transliteration. We're looking at the pointing in the Masoretic text.
Indeed, yeah. It's not like we're going to Bible Hub and finding the transliterations into the Latin characters and saying this has an E and this has an A. No, that's a good point.
Exactly. Like, for instance, the word echad. The word echad has a seagull under the aleph. And the seagull has 3 dots, when someone looks at the picture. Just like the word aḥad has a patak under the aleph, and the patak is a straight line. So, listening to the message, to me, it sounds as though Brother Gis is saying that we're just going by the sounds.
Or somebody's transliteration. That's the way I was interpreting it, yeah.
But from my understanding, we're going by the actual grammar, the structure of the language.
Yeah, that would be the second. So we are going off of the pointing in the Masoretic text, and you pointed out the segol and the patach, and these are not arbitrary designations. But if somebody wanted to dispute the pointing in the Masoretic text and just remain in the consonantal text, you're right, we could also go by the grammatical structure of the sentence, and we can get to that in a moment.
So one quick question I want to ask too. So is it important too, because I noticed he mentioned something
about Strong's Concordance.
About the Strong's Concordance, referencing.
Yeah, he was saying that the Strong's Concordance had echad, and then he looks on Bible Hub and it says aḥad.
Aḥad,
and
yes.
The first thing I'll say is that we never claim that the Strong's Concordance has major errors or anything like that. What's at issue here, though, and I think he's not aware of this, it may be the limitations upon Strong's Concordance. So, for example, when you look up a word, we'll get to the verbs in a second, but you look up a word that's not a verb, and what Strong's Concordance will give you is just the base word. It's not going to tell you whether that particular word is rendered masculine or feminine, or singular or plural, or in certain cases, whether it's in the construct state or not, and if that changes. Strong's Concordance isn't going to give you any of those details. When that word, that base word, is employed in a certain verse. And as a result, there's all sorts of nuance that's missed. And that was the point we were trying to make in the previous video, that just simply turning to Strong's Concordance and saying, well, look, according to Strong's Concordance, the word echad appears here, doesn't tell us anything about how that word is rendered in a given verse. Like, for example, the fact that the word echad is in the masculine construct in form in Daniel 10:13 and therefore becomes aḥad. Right? And this becomes, even more is going to be missed when you're dealing with verbs. And I know that our friend didn't really get into any verbs in the messages that he sent you, but I did find it interesting that in the screenshot that we have on the screen, the one that he sent you of him, looking up a particular portion in Strong's Concordance, he highlighted a verbal root, and I'm not sure if he was aware that that's a verb, but it's worth discussing here. So you see, he highlighted echad, and then above it, he highlighted aḥad. But so here's a point that needs to be made. When it comes to verbs, right, that number that's designated 258, that is a verbal root. And when Strong's Concordance gives you, points to a verb, it just gives you the root. And it doesn't tell you how that verb is going to be conjugated, which of the verb stems it appears in. And as a result, the amount of nuance that can be missed is even more significant. It's an even greater amount of nuance can be missed when dealing with verbs in Strong's Concordance. And again, this isn't a knock against Strong's Concordance. It's more a cautionary point about what can be missed when you're restricting yourself to Strong's Concordance. So just to use this as a quick example, that entry in Strong's Concordance, which is designated number 258, right? That's the root. It's a root. It's a verbal root, alef-ḥet-dalet root. And the one time that verb, it's referring to a verb, the one time that verb appears, it's in Ezekiel 21. Now, when you're dealing, for those who are used to English dictionaries, right? You can look a word up in an English dictionary and you just get the standard form of that word, and pretty much the way that word is used is going to be mostly the same. But with Semitic languages, you look up a verbal root, and then when you try to look up the verb, it's going to look very different. And this is a case of that, right? If you go looking up the verse, which is Ezekiel 21:16 in Christian translations, but if you have a rabbinic edition of the Bible, it's going to be Ezekiel 21:21. But whatever the case, it's in Ezekiel 21. And when you look up that verse, you're not going to just find aḥad by itself. You're going to find a much more complex verb because it's rendered in the hitpaᶜel stem in the imperative, right? So it actually says hitaḥadi, right? It's significantly more complex than just aḥad, right? And so if you're just saying, well, aḥad appears in this verse, there's much more of a story to be told there. And I wanted to point this out to show how different the use of the verb looks in the one verse that employs it as compared to, the way it's rendered in Strong's Concordance, where it's just, alef-ḥet-dalet, right? But then when you actually look at the verse, it's a much longer word, and then that root, that verbal root, is embedded within the verb. But if you're just looking at Strong's Concordance, you would totally miss that it's rendered in the hitpaᶜel and it's in the imperative, and, the actual word is not simply aḥad, but rather hitaḥadi. And so, the point here is one of nuance, right? So I would say that the point to be gleaned here is not that Strong's Concordance is an error, but rather that it's incredibly limited. So, for example, if we note how a word actually appears in the Hebrew text, it might not be prudent to object that, according to Strong's, something different appears, and then only to point to just a base form, which has been stripped of all its nuance. That's the point to glean here, regarding the difference between making recourse to Strong's and making recourse to the actual Hebrew text, going into the Masoretic text from which translations like the King James Bible were translated from. And this also takes us back to that second point you wanted to make, that just as we're not limiting ourselves, well, we're not really making recourse to, the transliterations that appear on some website or something like that, so too we're not really limiting ourselves to the pointing in the Masoretic text. There's also the structure of the sentence, and this is another layer of nuance that isn't going to be conveyed by just looking up individual words in isolation, or the base forms or roots of words in isolation in Strong's Concordance. So, for example, with the example of Daniel 10:13, which we were discussing, even if you look past the nikudot, the pointing, the dots and dashes that are employed by the Masoretes, there's also the structure of the sentence, right? The word echad is in the construct form, so it's aḥad, masculine construct, and that can be gleaned also from the fact that the way it's juxtaposed with the plural noun that follows, right? It's aḥad ha-sharim, right? And so that's also a relevant, yet another layer of nuance, which would be missed if you're simply making recourse to Strong's. And that's a point I wanted to bring up. Although, if I'm not mistaken, our friend didn't largely disagree with us on that grammatical point. So perhaps we've said enough here. I think perhaps we've said enough on, this particular nuance point about, the difference between just making recourse to Strong's vis-a-vis, looking directly into the Masoretic text. And so perhaps I could stop here.
All right, then. I think we'll close here and delve into some other subjects in the near future.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for having me.